On the co-founder search side, first of all, it needs to be a person who's in the same life stage or state of mind as I am, meaning like they're ready to jump in, they're fully committed, they're here, they're present, and they're actually ready to take on that journey that may last for multiple years.
Is everything over? Shall we give up on the gaming industry now? Shall we stop trying making games, building studios and companies that have the power to positively impact the future lives of millions of players, professional and humans? No, we don't. In this special track of Rise and Play, I will be focusing on the unspoken topics around building game companies, founders teams, fundraising, pitching, rebounding after closing your studio, company or losing your job, by bringing guests who are going through the same storm of 2024 like you, and keep fighting. I will also share openly my own process, trials and error, and step-by-step building the new game company Killen as the first-time CEO of a game company. I believe we are stronger together, and we don't have to go through the storm alone, because at Rise and Play, we are not alone. Oh, and one last thing, as you feel supercharged by listening to this episode, it will mean a lot to me, and if you haven't done it yet, that you hit the follow button. It will help with the discovery of the show so other people can benefit from the content too. Thanks, and now let's get to the episode. Welcome to a new episode of Rise and Play, and today I'm excited to have with us Olya Caliujnaia. So she's the CEO and co-founder of SanloToday, and she's been a product leader across gaming and fintech industry. Before Sanlo, Olya managed product and growth at Playfish, EA, Getty Images, Sigfig, Wells Fargo, and worked with early-stage companies as an entrepreneur in residence at XYZ Venture Capital. So quite a round experience before founding her company. And welcome, Olya. Good to see you again.
Hi, Sophie. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here and talking to you publicly.
Yeah. I'm interested in having more of a background and the journey for you before you came to the decision or the point of founding Sanlo. So we went through a bit of your experience, but maybe more meaningfully for you, what happened before you founded Sanlo?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. So in terms of founding Sanlo, I think there was a larger theme in my life around entrepreneurship from the early days. My parents were always or have been entrepreneurs. I was born in a country that ceased to exist before I turned 4. So it was an interesting combination of being raised in a family that was a family of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs that operated in a very unpredictable environment and finding creative yet ethical ways to build business. So I remember there was a time when I was 14 and I had this conversation with my dad of like, what do I want to do for university? And I had 2 areas of interest at the time. I really had an aspiration to eventually go and do some good work. I had no idea what it would be in developing countries. And I wanted to do that as in some sort of legal capacity. That's as far as it went. Or I would go and work and, ideally help people in, again, the countries that, probably needed most help by being a business person. So, but I wanted to have some sort of impact, but through a profession that I would ultimately adopt. And I remember having this conversation of like, there's a law school path versus there's a business school path. And I remember my dad at the time gave me that advice, and he said, "Well, I think business is a very creative field overall, and really you really choose your own adventure in terms of what kind of business you want to build, what kind of product you want to build, what kind of people you want to serve through that." So that was this decision when I was around 14, where like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to build a business, and this is my way to be creative. Ultimately, we immigrated. I think that's another layer of creativity that you need to adopt at a certain stage in your life. It's the time when you learn how to adapt and adapt very quickly. So on the professional journey side, I did go to business school. I dabbled in venture capital. I dabbled in strategy consulting. And there was this moment when I still vividly remember that I was in a business school in UK, and I was sitting with a schoolmate, and he completely randomly, he was like, there's this cool company called Playfish, and they do social games, and apparently they're doing really well. And I was like, gaming, is that a thing? And it was 2010. Like, okay, well, I'll check it out. But at that point, I was very much had my mindset on consulting. I have to go and do consulting because that's what you do after you finish your business school. So long story short, funnily enough, my husband actually got a job at Playfish, and I did go into consulting. I
Oh.
absolutely hated that. And it was a very big contrast in seeing how much he enjoyed his work, the process of creation, and what lifestyle I led and how I felt, which was not great. So again, long story short, we packed up from New York and moved back to London, and we both started working at Playfish. And that's when my career as a product manager started. So I fell in love with product management because that's where I started feeling this entrepreneurial spirit that you have a team, you have ability to be creative, and you have an impact on what you ultimately ship, and then you have this channel of communication with customers who you build it for. But long story short, I spent some time in gaming. I ended up going to Getty Images. I wanted to continue working on products for creative industry. So Getty is a stock photography company. So I worked a lot in a marketplace of, on one side you have photographers, and on the other side you have primarily, companies purchasing those images and videos. And then I went into fintech, and the thesis there was super interesting. It was 2015. The company I went to was called SigFig. It was the time when there was this massive move towards democratization of finances, so that it's not only high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals that have access to certain financial products. And the other piece, which was incredibly interesting to me, was also how do you change habits? And when it comes to money and financial health, it's one of those things that's so incredibly difficult to change. And that's what we were trying to do when I was at SigFig. You try to instill different behaviors in people around money, attitude to money, and ultimately, developing good habits like saving money. And then the next layer on top of that, where do you put that money into? And that was the tech itself. And in 2020, my older daughter was 3 years old. She was about to turn 3 years old. I was looking at her. I was like, oh my God, she's probably like a meter high at this point, and I still don't have a company. So the reason I'm bringing up the 1 meter high, because it was like literally this physical progression that I was able to see. Like, what am I waiting for? I need to do this thing. I need to start. And that's when I went to XYZ Venture Capital as entrepreneur in residence. I spent 6 months there. Big part of that was due diligence and being in this very privileged position of a venture capitalist, where you get to talk to a lot of people, you get to ask a lot of questions. Occasionally, hopefully, I was able to contribute something to those conversations too, with entrepreneurs. And we both know how important it is to be respectful to founders' times as well. So I was on that side of the fence, but I think at some point I felt that I want to get out of venture capital, and I need to do it myself. When I found gaming as the area to focus on, this is the group of people that I want to be able to serve from a product perspective. And that's really how it all started. It started with a who, and getting excited about like, who are the people I'm going to be building for.
What were the steps that happened to start? Because I'm really interested in the whole early stage pre-seed journey. I'm in it as well, and I don't hear that often so openly the stories of how those companies are formed, where especially on the investment side, some bootstraps, some start with investment. What was the journey for you on the first 6 months, 6 to 12 months for Sanlo? How did you form also your co-founding team?
Yeah, so there were two primary threads that I was working on. One was I knew that I did not want to be a solo founder. So it was important to find the right co-founder for both of us. And it was important that we are on the product side, that we're building something that will matter. So that there was a second thread of customer discovery. So those were the two pieces that took most of my time, really. On the co-founder search side, I actually worked with two different people as potential co-founders before rediscovering Will, my co-founder. And those were amazing learnings in itself. What I did was relatively structured, I suppose. With the first, we basically almost like time boxed those experiments of working together. So I worked with a person who actually had also product background, and we found out that we couldn't really. It was not sustainable for us to work together. There was probably too much overlap in terms of what we would bring to the table in terms of our skill set. Then I worked with another person, somebody who came from finance background, and it was also not exactly the right fit. We're friends to this day. He actually ended up being an advisor to us. And my learning coming out of those two sprints, for lack of a better word, was that first of all, it needs to be a person who's in the same life stage or state of mind as I am, meaning like they're ready to jump in, they're fully committed, they're here, they're present, and they're actually ready to take on that journey that may last for multiple years. It's a commitment. The second piece was that we need to get along very well together. We don't necessarily need to be closest friends, although Will and I are now very close friends, but we're at the point where we get each other. And then the third piece is the complementary around the skill set, right? So in my case, I'm product. Will is an engineer. So there's never really been an overlap, or where there's an overlap, but we never felt like we're stepping on each other's toes. And I think the fourth thing is just the general alignment and excitement about what it is that we're building, acknowledging that a lot of things may be changing, which goes back to the first point, that we're in it for a long haul and we both are committed. So that was the learning. And by the time I got reconnected with Will, actually completely randomly by a common friend of ours, was like, hey, by the way, you should talk to Will. Will and I spoke. And then within a week, we're like, we're doing this. Like, we're going to be co-founders. We're forming the company. This is all the logistical stuff. So that was the founder journey. And then the second thread was the customer discovery. The customer discovery, once there was this definition around the who, then literally it was, I'm sure I was annoying to some people, but it was like, can I please get just 30 minutes of your time? And at the end of each call, I would ask, like, is there somebody else I can speak with? You see what I'm going for? It's this kind of conversation. And more often than not, people are like, yeah, you should talk to this person. So that the customer discovery was the second piece. And then at the time, it was it was pandemic, but gaming was booming. And at that time, the UA spend was booming as well. The theme at that time was actually very much around like, hey, our game is doing well. We should invest in UA. We are investing. It seems to be working. We're not really 100% sure, but it looks like it's working because revenue is going up. And yeah, we have like 50 people. How much do we make? What's the P&L for a game? We're not sure, but it's probably fine, right? Because revenue is growing. So there was this ambiguity around like, is your game even profitable? And it's a math problem, so it's very solvable. So that was the initial thesis that we went with, and I think that opened up a very interesting can of worms around this whole financial piece. Around, there's so many components when come into place when you talk about what makes a company financially healthy. Of course, you need to have a product market fit. Of course, you need to have the right team. Of course, you need to have the right velocity of execution. But you also need to make sure that you have money in the bank, and also you use the money in the bank in a way that's sustainable. So that was ultimately that thesis around initial product formed, and I was at XYZ. And XYZ ended up being our first investor. They wrote a safe note, or we did a safe note rather. We did our first 500K. Around the same time, I reconnected with Will. So it's, all stars aligned, and like, well,
Wow.
I guess this is happening. The company is formed. we're official on paper and we got some money in the bank. So now just keep going forward.
Wow, what a beautiful story. I think here's for the listeners, the way you started was very lean, and I think that's anyhow you should start a product in discovery. And it starts also with the audience when you don't know it, right? Because you are solving a problem, but you don't really know how, but you know for who. So it's very good practice what you just shared on the product side, the search before converging. Okay, this is really the most common problem that we start and fix it. And also in a very methodical way, also your co-founder search. Sometimes you can have good relationship with people. I was actually my previous a long time ago company was with previous colleagues, but we were just not committed in the same way in the company. So I think there's an important piece where you have really several things that should be aligned, and being just colleague or having worked together is not enough, because are you ready to build a company? Because it's much more than being an employee.
One thing I'll add to this, there's an amazing article that was published through First Round Venture Capital. It's called something like Co-founder Dating, and it's literally a list of 50 questions, and it covers everything from your values in life all the way into what kind of exit you want to have out of this company. And Will and I knew each other since 2011. So it's been 13 years now. So we've known each other for a very long time. But we actually honestly went away and each of us wrote answers to those questions. And I think to us, at least, it was so valuable because it was almost like a self-reflection as well, that you almost like we mentally prepared ourselves for that journey ahead of us. We ended up not talking through all the 50 questions in the end because it would have taken probably like 3 days. But we picked the questions that were most important to each of us, and we talked through this. So it was almost like a mini coaching session for each other, but then also figuring out like whether there was enough of an overlap, and also realizing ourselves, are we ready for that long haul ahead of us? And are we, as you said, like, are we at the same point in life where we committed and we're doing this?
So we covered the product, the audience. You're 3 years in the journey. I'd like to hear more on the overview as well, the journey of the company, from where you started, what has been your progress, what has been the difficulties. And there could be some on the investment side, fundraising side, if any, to share, or more on the, especially when you build a new service and you want to build new habits. You talked about that. It's difficult to change bad habits. So I'd like to hear more about the things you haven't anticipated when you started the company and that turned out to be your biggest challenges through the journey.
One of the main learnings, actually, however cliche it may sound, is building the team. And I think I personally feel like I got better at that just in the last maybe few months. Having the right people on the team at the right time beyond your co-founder is so important. If I were to look back, or if when I start another company, I will approach hiring very differently from what we did initially. I'm not in the could have, should have, would have mode either, because I just didn't know. I'm a first time founder, so I didn't know better. And hiring for a startup, early stage startup, is very different than hiring for a company that's already well funded or it's public or whatnot. So that's one of the big pieces. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because ultimately you need right people to execute on however grand your vision is and who your customers are. You need to have right minds and perspectives at the table from the early stage. So that's the first learning. I think that was very important to me personally. When it comes to working with gaming companies, specifically going back to this point of who we're building this for, one of the interesting discoveries, and now I look back, I was like, yeah, of course, but nonetheless, it took a little bit of time to come to that realization, is that gaming companies, more often than not, are led by what I would call product people, meaning like they very much focused, admitted and deservingly so, on the player experience. So anything that has direct impact on a player usually takes priority. And any and then it translates into what people they hire, what kind of funding they're looking for, what kind of tools they or vendors they consider to bring on board. Ultimately, it comes back to the player. Player is the same way game developers are for us, the same way players are for the gaming companies. And I think it's a different way to think about what we build and how we communicate to the game developers as to what problems we're trying to solve and what challenges we want to help with. At first, we were focused on like the more boring, what I'm using in conversation with you, the financial health. Generally, this does not resonate with people on average, right? Like it's a very vague term. It means a lot to me because I spent years in this, but usually it doesn't mean a lot in like normal conversation. So I think it took us a little bit of time to realize that what we build ultimately has to tie with how it impacts the player experience, and then everything that supports that player experience is something that can be seen as needed and required. So that was kind of that's what changed a little bit in our outlook over time of how we build the products and which products we build. Then it's the game developer, then game developer cares about the player, and then what do we deliver as Sanlo to help game developers with their player. And what we learned was that like we ultimately help with monetization. When you think about it, we help with revenue, we help with the money side of the business. So we didn't know that before. Initially, we went in and we said we're going to help with financial planning and analysis, and not exactly the term that gets people excited, and understandably so, because you don't think about financial planning and analysis. You're thinking about how can my player have better experience, and how can I bring more players and players who will stick around. So that was another learning. And then I think the other thing is every product that we've been building has been different from a perspective of, again, the positioning and the velocity of our own development. So for example, web shops now, it's a space that attracts a lot of attention. There's a very intense competition. And I think it's actually, it's good that there's competition, but there's no space for everybody. 7 or so companies that are doing this now. So inevitably somebody, will disappear, somebody will get acquired, and maybe a couple maybe 3 will stick around, and there will be the vendors in the space. And then ultimately they will start, flourishing as well. But I think what's important now is the product. Whoever gets the right product for what developers need now. This impacts also how we build the product, and who are our closed beta customers, and who are the right customers to work with now, versus, for example, when we launched the capital product, there was competition, but the competition was not as intense. It was also different economy. It was booming economy. So, companies were looking for financing. Companies would be raising VC rounds, and they would want this additional non-dilutive capital so they can keep reinvesting into UA. Versus with now, there's a lot of sensitivity to your margins, keeping in mind your cost structures, understanding your ROI for any initiative you pick as a company to grow. So very different mindsets of developers, very different competitive landscape. And then therefore very different feature set that we're prioritizing based on what developers optimizing for now versus what they were optimizing for example, like 2 years ago when we launched the capital product. So the learning here is that, in our case, when you're building a platform or like a vertical stack of tools, each product that we introduce has its own, almost like solves different types of problems for developers, for our customers. And it requires different velocity of development and different criteria for what features we prioritize. Or maybe just us that like we didn't really develop a playbook for each new product release. But for us so far, every product has its own life, if you will, in terms of how we develop and then how we bring it to market.
For here the listeners, because it's really relevant service that you're offering, with your product. Who are your customers, and what products do you offer today? Which is my general question to finish at last. What is the state of the company today? And for developers listening, what is the size, the business, I don't know, the focus of your customers? So they can reach out to you if they fall in the category
Yeah.
that they resonate with.
Yeah. So ultimately, the vision for our company is to help gaming companies with monetization and build monetization in a sustainable ways. So they have a visibility into how much they make, but they're also always understanding what it means for their bottom line. So they don't burn themselves to the ground. And we've seen companies that have high revenue volumes, but they're almost like in a continuous survival mode because they're living month to month, even despite the fact that the revenues are in a good state and they're growing. So the products that we have now, we just launched the web shop. And the reason we launched the web shop is that this is a very clear opportunity that, that's already been demonstrated by a subset of companies, that it's a good channel, it's a strong channel to drive your incremental revenue, to protect your margins. But I think the most interesting part is actually this is an opportunity to, one, start building deeper relationships with your players. Funnily enough, that's what we were doing back in like social gaming days.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had a more direct channel of communication to a lot of players that played the game. And then the second interesting piece about web shops is that I think it's just the first step in the direction of giving any gaming company really have an opportunity to be not only on mobile, but not only iOS and Android, but go to other platforms. And I think the web shop is just a baby step in the direction of having this new channel added to where they already mastered their art. So for us as a company, this is where we want to help expand your coverage, help expand the reach to more players wherever they are or whoever they are. So that's the web shop. We have that live. We now work with a few closed beta customers, and the companies that are a great profile to work with is they have a live title. They're on iOS and or Android. They have IP economy, and they're interested in really growing their revenue and starting to move in the direction of building a stronger relationships directly with their players, and also start moving in a direction where they can have coverage outside of iOS and Android. And then our first product, the one that I talked about earlier, is the capital. So this is where we're not a venture capital fund, we're not a venture debt fund, we're not a private equity firm, we're not a bank. But what we do, we assess companies based on their performance, their game or games performance, as well as their financials. And then we provide financing, and we're not prescribing where that money can be used. So we're not a UA financing company. Mm-hmm. We're a company that provides financing to gaming companies, and then a gaming company has a full control of how they spend the money. It could be UA, it could be working capital, it could be a development budget, it could be really bridge financing in some cases. But that's the second product that we have.
All right, very clear. Well, I put the links anyway in the show notes for ones who want to inquire more about the services. And it's very exciting about the presence of the web shop. I know it's very competitive as well, but I think that's ultimately the way to go for given the ecosystem and how developers are trying to make those revenues independently from the platforms. I will not get too much into that, but so this is exciting direction to explore. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about the future development, the future products of Sanlo. I'm sure we will have more discussions beyond these days because there's, so much to cover about your journey. It was very inspiring, exciting to hear the beginning of Sanlo. That's always the most exciting part for me. But I want to make sure also to cover properly what your company is doing, and then to have also other developers reaching out to you after listening to this episode.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. It was absolutely lovely. Always pleasure talking to you. And thanks for really giving me the opportunity to talk about all of this. It was really great. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. I am growing a community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, Please share the podcast with other conscious leaders because we have so much more we can learn from each other. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate the show on Spotify or your other favorite podcast platform. It will help other growing leaders to discover the show and benefit from the valuable insights. If you would like to grow rapidly your leadership skills, you can find more insights on riseandplay.io, where you will also find my free masterclass on conscious leadership and other resources that I offer. Have a great week and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time.